An elderly veteran stepped into Judge Caprio's courtroom with the quiet dignity of a man who had survived far harder battles than a traffic ticket, but today even $50 felt like a mountain he could not climb. He wasn't loud, he wasn't arrogant, he wasn't entitled, but life had humbled him so deeply that even standing there took effort. Moments earlier, the bailiff had whispered that the man seemed worried, counting the bills in his wallet, folding and unfolding them as if hoping they would somehow multiply. He had arrived alone, walking slowly, wincing slightly with each step, and yet he apologized for being late before anyone could even ask. His offense was small, a parking violation near a medical clinic, but the weight behind it was heavy. A fixed income, rising medication costs, and a life shaped by service had left him stretched thin. The tension in the room wasn't from arrogance, it was from vulnerability, and in this case, the core moral was clear: compassion, punishment, humanity, technicality. This wasn't the story of a disrespectful defendant. This was the story of a man who served his country and now stood before a judge hoping someone would see his heart before his fine. Tell us where you're watching from, because kindness looks the same everywhere. It was a quiet mid-morning in Providence, the kind where sunlight slid through the tall courtroom windows and settled softly on the polished wooden benches. The atmosphere felt calm, but there was a certain heaviness in the air, the kind that appears when a case carries more emotion than conflict. Judge Caprio adjusted his glasses, glanced at the docket, and nodded gently as the next name was called. The bailiff leaned slightly toward him and murmured, "Judge, he's a veteran, seems a little shaken, said he's been dealing with medical issues." There was no warning about attitude, no report of disrespect, only concern. The elderly man stepped forward slowly, using the bench for balance. His jacket was worn, the fabric softened by years of use. A small military pin glimmered on the collaring. The kind people wear not out of pride, but remembrance. His case was simple on paper: a parking violation outside a medical clinic. He had exceeded the limit by 15 minutes during an appointment he couldn't afford to miss. No priors, no history of violations, just a man trying to keep up with life while life kept moving faster than he could. Still, even in this quiet moment, subtle signs of anxiety showed. He kept smoothing the front of his jacket. He held his paperwork carefully, almost nervously. He whispered, "Sorry," to the clerk, even though he hadn't done anything wrong. There was no entitlement here, no eye rolls, no sighs of annoyance. Only an older gentleman who seemed afraid that a small mistake might create a burden he couldn't carry. The courtroom softened as he approached. People watched not with judgment, but with quiet empathy. It was one of those rare moments where everyone, from the back row to the judge's bench, felt the human weight of the case before a single word was spoken. Judge Caprio looked up, ready to hear the story behind the ticket, and perhaps offer something more meaningful than a fine. Judge Caprio began the hearing the same way he always did, with warmth. "Good morning, sir," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Take your time. There's no rush." The elderly veteran nodded, gripping the edge of the podium as he steadied himself. "Good morning, Your Honor," he replied. His tone was respectful, almost apologetic, as if he believed he was inconveniencing the court simply by being present. There was no clash of personalities here, no attitude, no ego, but the tension existed in a different way, in the quiet struggle of a man who had spent a lifetime giving to his country, now forced to explain why he couldn't afford a parking ticket. Judge Caprio glanced at the violation. "You were parked near the medical clinic on Elmwood Avenue," he said. 15 minutes past the limit." "Yes, sir," the man whispered. I had a checkup. It took longer than I expected." The courtroom fell still. His voice trembled, not from fear of punishment, but from the weight of dignity. You could tell he didn't want pity. He didn't want excuses. He just wanted to tell the truth. Caprio leaned forward slightly. Were you being treated for something important? The man hesitated, unsure whether to share. His eyes lowered, his fingers tightening around a folded appointment slip. I have a heart condition, Judge, he finally said. And the medicine, it's expensive. I'm on a fixed income. I didn't want to be late to the appointment. They're hard to schedule. A soft murmur passed through the courtroom. The kind of emotional shift that happens when a room full of strangers collectively understands someone's burden. One woman in the back shook her head, whispering, "My father's the same way." Another man exhaled deeply, as if feeling the weight himself. Judge Caprio didn't interrupt. He didn't push. He simply listened, allowing the man to speak at his own fragile pace. That was the contrast in this moment. Dignity on the bench, humility at the podium, no arrogance, no challenge, just a quiet battle between a man's pride and his reality. "What is the hardest part for you right now?" Judge Caprio asked gently. The veteran looked up, eyes glistening. "The hardest part," he said, "Yadori Saning," voice breaking slightly hem, "is choosing between the medicine that keeps me alive and the bills that keep coming." A hush fell across the courtroom, deeper, heavier, and unmistakably emotional. Judge Caprio closed the violation folder slowly. He already knew this case was not about a ticket, it was about humanity. The courtroom stayed silent as the elderly veteran tried to steady his breathing. He wasn't disrespectful, not even close, but there was a rising tension, the kind that comes from a man trying desperately to hold himself together in front of strangers. Judge Caprio recognized it instantly. "Sir," he said gently, "if you need a moment, please take one." But the veteran shook his head. "No, Your Honor, I just don't want to be a burden. I didn't come here to make excuses." And that was the first stage of this emotional escalation. His own pride fighting against his reality. He kept apologizing, even for things he hadn't done wrong. Apologizing for speaking slowly. Apologizing for his shaking hands. Apologizing for being sick. It wasn't disrespect to the court. It was disrespect to himself, born from years of hardship. The second stage came when the judge asked, "Did you consider contesting the ticket earlier?" The veteran hesitated, then whispered, "I didn't want to bother anyone, and I didn't want to look like I was trying to get special treatment because I'm a veteran." His voice trembled on the last word. It wasn't self-pity. It was the weight of a lifetime of service carried on tired shoulders. A woman in the audience wiped her eyes. A man near the door looked down, jaw tight, visibly moved. Judge Caprio's gaze softened. "Special treatment isn't the issue here. Fairness is." But the veteran shook his head again, the third stage. "Your Honor, I don't deserve fairness more than anyone else. Everyone struggles. Everyone has problems. I don't want to take resources from someone who needs them more." The judge was silent for a moment. This wasn't arrogance. This was humility stretched too far, a man believing he was worth less than the help he needed. And then came the fourth stage, the emotional breaking point. The veteran swallowed hard, then confessed in a trembling voice, "I didn't even want to come today. I thought maybe I'd just let the fine go unpaid, but then I worried it might turn into something worse. And I can't handle any more problems right now." His hands shook, his shoulders tensed. He blinked rapidly, fighting back tears he wasn't ready to show. Not a single person in the courtroom moved. Even the bailiff, normally stoic, stood a little gentler, as if guarding not the room, but the man's dignity. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his expression calm, steady, deeply human. "Sir," he said softly, "you're not wasting anyone's time. And you're not asking for anything you don't deserve. You served your country. Let us serve you today with fairness. The emotional tension in the room didn't explode. It softened, warmed, and wrapped itself around the veteran like a blanket of understanding. This was not disrespect escalating. This was human struggle reaching the surface. And the judge could see the moment had finally come for him to step in. Judge Caprio exhaled slowly, sensing that the veteran had reached the edge of what his dignity would allow him to reveal. The man's shoulders were tight, his jaw trembling slightly, and for a moment he stared down at the podium, almost as if he wished he could disappear into it. This wasn't a breaking point created by defiance. It was a breaking point created by exhaustion. The judge leaned in, his tone shifting from procedural to deeply personal. "Sir, you are standing in this courtroom with more courage than most people ever show. You came here in spite of your health, in spite of your financial worries, in spite of your pride." The veteran swallowed hard, fighting a wave of emotion. "You're too kind, Judge," he whispered. "I'm just trying not to make this a problem." But then, with one simple sentence, the emotional dam cracked. "I don't want anyone to think I'm asking for sympathy just because of my service," he said. His voice broke on the word service. It was the quietest moment of vulnerability the courtroom had seen all morning, and it changed everything. The bailiff subtly shifted his stance, not out of threat, but out of instinct, as if wanting to support the man should he lose his footing. Audience members leaned forward, unable to look away. Even the clerk paused her typing, sensing the weight of the moment. This was the courtroom's power shift, not the kind caused by a judge raising their voice, but the kind caused by compassion taking control. Judge Caprio closed his folder with deliberate gentleness. He didn't need the paperwork now. He had the truth directly from the source. "Let me make something very clear," he said, his voice calm and steady. "This courtroom is not here to punish honesty. It is not here to punish hardship. And it is certainly not here to punish someone who sacrificed for this country." The veteran looked up, eyes glistening. Caprio continued, "You are not here to beg. You are here to be treated with fairness and dignity, and I intend to make sure you receive exactly that." The room fell still. Emotion thick, hearts softened, the balance shifting entirely toward humanity. For the first time, the veteran allowed himself a slow, shaky breath, as if realizing he wasn't standing alone anymore. Judge Caprio lifted the veteran's violation slip once more, but this time it wasn't a cold document between them. It was simply a formality standing in the way of justice. He read it quietly, then placed it down with care, as though he didn't want even the paper to feel harsh toward the man standing before him. "Sir," he began gently, "the base fine for this parking violation is $30. The veteran nodded immediately, not out of agreement, but out of habit, the instinct to accept responsibility even when life has already been too heavy. "Judge," Caprio continued, "ordinarily there would also be a late fee because you weren't able to come in earlier." He paused. The courtroom held its breath. "But I'm not adding that today." A soft murmur spread through the benches. Not surprise. Respect. The veteran's brows lifted slightly as if he wasn't sure he heard correctly. I appreciate that, Your Honor," he said, voice thin but sincere. "I'll find a way to pay the 30. Caprio shook his head gently. "Let me explain something to you," he said. "The purpose of this court is not to make life harder for people who are already doing their best. It's to uphold fairness, and fairness isn't always found in a number." The veteran blinked, confused. "You mean..." The judge leaned back, weighing the moment carefully. "You were at the clinic because you were taking care of your health," Caprio said. "You weren't out breaking laws on purpose. You weren't being reckless. You were simply trying try and get the care you need. He paused again, the kind of pause that carries compassion, not hesitation. And more importantly, you served this country. You carried burdens most people will never understand. I think it's only right that today we carry one small burden for you. The veteran swallowed, emotion rising fast. Therefore, Judge Caprio concluded softly, I'm dismissing the ticket in its entirety. Gasps rippled quietly around the courtroom, and the veteran's lips parted slightly, but no words came. His throat tightened, his eyes filled, and he placed a trembling hand over his chest. Judge Caprio added one final line, steady and firm. This isn't charity. This is fairness. And accountability isn't optional, but compassion isn't optional either. The courtroom exhaled together as if witnessing something sacred. For a long, quiet moment, the elderly veteran simply stood there, one hand still over his chest, the other gripping the podium for support. His breath trembled as he tried to steady himself, but the emotion in his eyes said everything. Judge Caprio waited patiently. He didn't rush him. He didn't fill the silence. He just allowed the man to feel the weight lifting off his shoulders. Finally, the veteran managed to speak, though his voice was soft and uneven. Your Honor, I don't know what to say, he whispered. I came in here thinking I'd walk out with another problem I couldn't handle. I didn't expect this. He looked down, blinking hard, as though ashamed of the tears forming. I'm sorry, he added quickly. I'm sorry for getting emotional. I'm usually stronger than this. That was the moment his pride cracked, not in a humiliating way, but in a deeply human way. A lifetime of strength meeting a moment of unexpected grace. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his expression warm and steady. You don't need to apologize for being human, he said. You've spent your whole life being strong for others. It's okay to let others be strong for you today. The veteran inhaled shakily, nodding. But I want to apologize for the trouble, he continued. I didn't mean to take the court's time. I didn't want anyone to think I was trying to avoid responsibility. The humility in his voice softened the entire room. Several people wiped their eyes. One woman quietly whispered, "Bless him." Even the clerk gave a small, sympathetic smile. The veteran finally lifted his gaze, eyes glistening but honest. "Thank you, Judge," he said, voice filled with sincerity. "Thank you for treating me with respect. I won't forget it." And in that moment, the court seemed to breathe again, the emotional tension resolving into something gentle, warm, and deeply human. Judge Caprio took a slow breath, letting the emotion of the moment settle gently across the courtroom. Then, he looked directly at the veteran, not as a judge speaking down to a defendant, but as one human being speaking to another who had carried far too much for far too long. "Sir," he began, his voice steady and warm, "there's something I want you to remember long after you leave this courtroom." He paused, the kind of pause that invites every ear in the room to lean in. "In this courtroom, character counts more than currency," he said softly. "And you've shown more character today than many people who walk through these doors with perfect health and full wallets." The veteran lowered his eyes, humbled. Judge Caprio continued, "You talked about not wanting special treatment because of your service. But fairness is not special treatment. Fairness is recognizing the truth of someone's life, not just the words printed on a ticket." A few quiet nods moved through the courtroom. "Respect costs nothing and changes everything," the judge added. You've given respect to this court, to this city, and to this country your entire life, and today we give that respect back to you." He leaned back slightly, his tone becoming almost fatherly. Success doesn't buy anyone a discount on decency, but hardship doesn't erase anyone's dignity either. You walked in here worried, apologizing for being human, when the truth is, the world needs more people with your humility. The veteran's eyes glistened once again. Judge Caprio finished with a gentle smile. "Remember this. You are not defined by a fine, a mistake, or a moment of struggle. You are defined by the life you've lived. And you've lived it with honor." The courtroom stayed silent, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that fills the heart before it reaches the ears. As the veteran stepped back from the podium, the courtroom remained unusually quiet, not out of tension, but out of reflection. It was one of those rare moments where a simple traffic hearing reminded everyone present of something bigger than the law itself. And now the narration shifts gently toward you, the viewer, because somewhere in your life, you've seen a moment like this too. Maybe it was a parent struggling to stay strong. Maybe it was a stranger who carried more pain than they showed. Maybe it was someone who never asked for sympathy but clearly needed understanding. So here's the question. Judge Caprio's courtroom asks us all, have you ever witnessed someone forget their own worth because life became too heavy? And more importantly, what would you have done in that moment? Compassion isn't weakness. Fairness isn't charity. And sometimes the smallest act of understanding becomes the greatest relief someone receives all week. This case wasn't just about a ticket. It was about recognizing humanity where it often goes unnoticed. As the veteran walked out of the courtroom, shoulders lighter and eyes a little brighter, one thing became clear. He learned that in Judge Caprio's courtroom, respect is earned, never bought. And compassion, it's always part of the verdict. If this story moved you, if you believe that justice can be firm without losing its heart, if you believe that kindness still matters in a world that often forgets it, then you're in the right place. Subscribe for more real courtroom stories where humanity speaks louder than anger, where fairness finds a voice, and where every case reminds us what justice is meant to feel like. Thank you for watching and for keeping compassion alive.